Fabulous as usual.
Doing great.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, obviously, we're here today for a fireside chat with Bill Binch. Of course, before we start, I always like to start us off with a quick icebreaker. So today's question is, if you had to choose a pet other than a cat or dog, what would it be? Pete, you want to start us off?
Sure. I'm going to answer this in a little bit of a different way. I think my pet is my 5-year-old, Mikey. So, he's kind of like our little Pokemon. So, I think like he's more than enough for us to feed and water. So that's sure. Bill, I feel that like your kids are out of the house now. Have you do you have a pet that you brought in to back that up?
Yeah, we actually have the pet. It's a desert tortoise. Now I live in the desert, so there's some tie together there. But it's a fascinating scheme in Arizona. You're not actually allowed to own a desert tortoise. It's like a licensing thing. You have to go to the state where you have to demonstrate you built the proper sized pen that's
Oh, wow.
enclosed and has like shade and has food and has water source. And then once you demonstrate that, they give you essentially a perpetual license, and they give you the desert tortoise. And ours is like it's hard to judge age, I guess, of tortoises, but I guess ours is like 7 years old or something, 8 years old.
Oh my goodness. What is his or her name?
Ben Kenobi.
I mean, obviously. Oh, and on Tatooine, clearly,
Yeah.
right in the desert. That's amazing. Elliot, what about you? I know you have a dog, but
Yeah.
outside of that,
Outside of that, honestly, when I visited Tulum years ago, I was really inspired by like just all the iguanas that I see out in nature.
oh,
And even though they terrify me, they kind of look like green, leathery dogs to me. So I think I think I would go with the iguana.
yeah,
Um, yeah,
nice.
thank you. Okay, so thanks for sharing, guys. Gonna get into the content now. Or right before we get into the content, going to talk about MSP a little bit. So today's event is brought to you by the team here at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest and highest quality community for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operations, and sales enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. Our mission is to create an environment for a member to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own and help them see around corners that they may not know about. We do that through live sessions like this, an online forum, and our quarterly summits. If you're not already a part of MSP, you're going to be invited to join after this event. And before we dive into the event, I'm going to go over some quick housekeeping notes, of course. First of all, this event is being recorded. You're going to be able to access the recordings and key takeaways on the previous events page of the MSP website. Second, if there's any questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A function, and they're going to do their best to get to them during the event. Okay, time to get the ball rolling here. Pete, going to hand things over to you, talk about Atrium, and do some intros. I'll see you at the
Yeah,
end.
yeah, for sure. Thank you, Elliot. I really appreciate it. Hey, folks. My name's Pete Kazanji. A little bit more intros here in a second. But for folks who are not familiar with Atrium, we make what we call data-driven sales management software that helps AE, SDR, AMCSM managers use data to improve team performance and essentially help modern sales organizations embed a culture of data-driven management. And so essentially what Atrium does is it continuously monitors dozens and dozens of AE and SDR KPIs and proactively alerts managers and leaders and operations when something is off with your reps, your teams, and so on. And so what this means is that managers can get to coaching insights faster and drive positive behavior change and win. So that's a little bit on us. I'm really excited for our chat today. Before we get jamming here, we have an offer for folks. If anyone would like one of their very own sales nerd hoodies, like this one I'm wearing right now, go ahead and sign up in the using the link in the chat there. And so we're going to go ahead and drop that here, and we'll get that right out for you. So but on to the kind of the more fun stuff here. For folks that don't know me, my name is Pete Kazanji. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. Prior to Atrium, I started a recruiting software company called Talentbin that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. And that's really where I went from being like a business generalist founder to our first seller, first sales manager, sales leader. Subsequent to the acquisition of Talentbin by Monster, wrote a book on startup sales called Founding Sales, and then started the Modern Sales Community. So that's a little bit on me, but more importantly, Bill, maybe you can kind of give folks a little bit of context on what it is that you spend your time on these days at Battery, and then a little bit of context on your experience at Pendo and Marketo before then.
Yeah. It's probably easier to start in chronological order. I'm a
Do it.
classic go-to-market exec. I came out of school and joined Oracle. And essentially the first 15 years of my career were all at big billion-dollar organizations, learning my muscles, my skill set. And then as LeBron says, I took my talents and instead of going to Miami, I went to my first startup, failed at that, but it taught me a tremendous amount. And then I got really fortunate in meeting up with the crew at Marketo very early on in their days, and joined there and embarked on a 10-year journey, doing pretty much everything inside of that organization on the go-to-market side. And coming out of that great experience, I got introduced to Pendo and joined Pendo, and was fortunate to work with that org, growing them from about 10 million to 100 million over 3 years. Both Marketo and Pendo were Battery funded companies, and thus my relationship with Battery was pretty strong at that point. And coming out of Pendo, trying to determine what I was going to do, I made a left turn and moved out of working for software companies and came to work for a financial services company, because essentially that's what Battery is. We're an investment firm. But my role didn't really ever change. I still now help companies think about their go-to-market. I help them grow. The difference is that instead of focusing all on one company, I do it across a portfolio of companies.
Nice. What does that typically involve? Like as you like work with the portfolio? I know that we've done like content events together and what have you, but like what are some of the other things that you do with the portfolio?
Yeah, most of my time is spent with the companies themselves. And, it happens to be, Pete, this is the coolest job in the world. If you look at my last 15 years at Pendo and Marketo, really what I did was help those companies grow 3 ways. Number 1, move through segments. Number 2, move geographically. And number 3, bring new products to market. And
Sure.
It happens to be, if you go talk to any CEO of a SaaS software company and say, are you looking to grow up market, or are you looking to grow down market if they're enterprise? Are you looking to go outside your primary country HQ? Are you looking to add products through acquisition or through organic development? The answer is yes, yes, and yes. And then the question just becomes, okay, what sequence are we going to do that? And so having 15 years of doing that inside of, what I consider 2 fairly fast growth companies, I think gives me at least some point of view to come in and help guide. So that's where I spend almost most of my time. The content is a little bit more just to, I think, help build the Battery brand. And honestly, to create a little bit of a library, because it's surprising. I get asked a lot of the same questions, end of the year.
Totally.
Can you look at our next year business plan and point out things that we might have missed? The beginning of the year, people want to start looking at org structure and comp plans and things like that. And so I try to create content that I think is useful and repetitive.
I love it. Yeah, well, let's talk about one of those topics really quickly, like the notion of like new segments.
Yep.
I think that I think a lot of organizations these days are thinking about going up market for a variety of reasons. Like I think a lot of companies that have historically maybe sold to like their Series A, Series B, Series C companies are finding that those organizations really aren't receptive to buying things as much as they used to be, and instead it's oftentimes because those organizations weren't really like a Series B company. They were more like a Series A or maybe even a seed, kind of like gussied up and like didn't maybe have product market fit, or maybe didn't have like a reliable business. And so what a lot of vendors are doing is now like rotating to focus in on organizations that have like, yeah, like they might be feeling a slowdown or what have you, but at least it's like they have a reliable business that is like has some more friction on it versus a business that like maybe actually wasn't a business, right? It just kind of looked like a business. And so I think a lot of organizations are looking about like to kind of pivot from selling to those Series A or Series B startups to later stage organizations, or even like going concerns, public organizations, what have you. What would be some of the like topics you would kind of coach folks on paying attention there when they're going from maybe selling to like a Series A company that has like a single buyer and a single decision maker, or selling to a Series B organization that has like a informal procurement process or an informal kind of like project, like technology adoption process to like larger organizations. Obviously a very big topic, but I'm sure you can kind of like provide some kind of guidelines there.
Yeah, I'll try to distill it down. Actually, when I joined Battery back in 2021, this was the most common asked question of me is, do I have any materials or thoughts or frameworks for how to help a company grow from SMB or mid-market into the enterprise? And obviously 2021, the market was outstanding. People were doing it because of opportunity, right? Not because like as you brought up. Yeah. And so I actually wrote a book called Growing Up, ebook. A book isn't right. Growing Up.
I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah. If anybody wants it, just hit me up on LinkedIn. I'll send you a copy.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's fantastic.
I think the key takeaway is I went and talked to other companies and sales leaders about that topic. Is the thing I can distill is moving up into the enterprise is a company-wide motion. Sure. And a lot of people kind of throw the underhanded pitch and not the fastball when doing that. They think, oh, we'll just go hire a couple of enterprise sales reps, and then magically we'll sell there. Well, what do those enterprise sales reps encounter? Number one, no referenceability in the enterprise. Number two, a product that honestly might not have security or the integrations required to play successfully in the enterprise. No marketing. Obviously, you have no references in that space, so no one's marketing there, which means they have to fight their way into every one of those deals. That's a hard slog. And so the message I always try to convey to companies when they start talking about going to the enterprise is I do this little stress test. I ask 3 questions. I go, first things first. Let's take a company like Qantas Airlines. They decide to buy your software. They're based in Sydney, Australia. And the first question they ask is, well, how are you going to implement your software? Because you guys are a California-based startup, you're 17 hours away. How do you do this? And you're like, okay, we have people here. We're going to do it over Zoom, right?
We're going to send Bill to Sydney.
Yeah, that's it in the back, right? That's the Great Barrier Reef, at least. So the first question is, how are you going to implement me? The second question, let's go to BMW in Germany says, we love your product. We want to buy it, but you got to have our data stored here in Germany. Do you have servers here in Germany? And the answer is no. We have, a single server here in the US. And it's like, okay. Then the third question becomes, take an American company, take Boeing, comes and you go send them your MSA and they go, no. You do this on our MSA. Do you have legal team ready to go and work through what's probably a very non-SaaS agreement and make it into a SaaS agreement? Now, pause there, Pete. What I just asked was 3 questions that have nothing to do with marketing nor sales. It had to do with, number 1, how you deliver your product. Number 2, your DevOps and how you host your product. Number 3, how you're legal. Those are 3 areas that surround marketing and sales. And by the way, those are the 3 areas that are probably easier to solve for than getting your marketing and sales right when going into the enterprise. So to distill it down real quickly, it's a company-wide motion. It comes from the top. The CEO has to be bought in and has to say, we are going to go direct product and dev, R&D work towards a product. That means maybe the security, that means the DevOps, that means the integrations, but then importantly, product. We need product that plays up in that space. And then that rolls downstream. Marketing has got to start learning how to market to a new buyer, one that's much more probably focused than like your typical SEO, inbound demand gen led type of marketing program. Sales has to learn a whole new language. They have to learn legal. They have to learn negotiation. CS has to learn deployments and implementations and how that all works. That whole, circle of life has to come together at once.
Yeah. Wow. That was a lot. Do you cover a lot of that stuff in Growing Up Enterprise?
Yeah, it breaks it down really.
Probably and more. Probably.
I try to do it by function. It was a logical breakdown. It was fascinating writing it because you've written a book and this. This is an ebook, so it's about a quarter the size of a pure book. But man, the iterations, and then you have then you send it out to someone like you and you read it and you're like, no, this isn't right. And like you give your feedback, like just getting it all.
No, I'd be like, oh, it's wonderful, Bill. That's wonderful. Go for it. That's super fantastic. Maybe actually Elliot can grab. Actually, is that available on the Battery website, or
It is.
yeah,
And
maybe Elliot can grab the link and drop it in the chat, or folks
cool.
can find Bill on LinkedIn and hit him up. Yeah, I mean, just to kind of add some kind of notes in there. One of the things that I like to talk about is because Bill referenced my book, Founding Sales, earlier, and historically, like, my specialty has been in the kind of like 0 to 1 stage of selling, right? Where like you have a product that maybe like loosely fits the market, or you have a hypothesis that the product could fit the market, and then of course like then you just like you got to close a customer, any customer, and then like see if you can close like 9 more, and then deliver accordingly. And like usually what ends up happening is new segments that you go into, they kind of have to be treated in the same sort of way, right? Like you can't sell that like this product that fits like the SMB market, or fits the mid-market market, or whatever. You can't just say like, oh, well, we are like product market fit there, so ipso facto we will have product market fit in like large enterprise or even small enterprise, right? Like you have to approach it as a hypothesis first and foremost. And so what that means is you don't go like full bore into it, right? Like cannonball, right? It's more like, hey, cool. What we're going to seek to do is we're going to seek to close like a customer like this, or a handful. And because like what's going to happen is we're going to find a bunch of like broken stuff, as Bill kind of delineates earlier. So that was like one thing, is like always to approach the entry to a new segment as a hypothesis, and then, like same with like new product as well. The other thing too is like what you want to typically what you want to seek to do is like segments, even though we like call them different things. There's SMB, and then there's mid-market, and there's enterprise. It's actually like it's a gradient, right? And so there's small enterprise, and small enterprise, they'll still have like some of the trappings of the big enterprise, but it's almost like the baby version of it. And so you can kind of like rather than trying to eat the whale, it's like, oh, this is where we start encountering SOC 2 requirements. This is where we start encountering situations where if you don't have single sign-on as a feature, they're just like, go kick rocks, get out of here, kid. Like, and versus the thing that you were kind of denoting earlier, where it's like, oh, okay, cool. If you like if you can't co-locate your service within our country, like we're not going to care. That might be something that like shows up at a much larger organization. But what you can do is you can kind of start easing your way into the jacuzzi, and finding these like sharp edges as you move into the enterprise, by targeting a segment, like targeting the bottom of that segment, right? And like doing it at a like in a piecemeal process versus like kind of cannonballing in. Anything you wanted to add to that, Bill?
Yeah, it's a great riff there. I think a couple things. Number one, I have a friend, Abe Smith, over at Zoom, that has this great line that he says, you've got to be able to export your machinery. My first advice is don't try and do, like you said, the whale, eat the whale all at one bite. Don't try and do small, mid, and enterprise at the same time, because you're going to fail on all three fronts. Instead, take a place where you get some momentum, you have a repeatability, you can export the machinery. Meaning, if we own the mid-market and we now want to go to the mid-market to the enterprise, we at least have this commonality of how we do things. And I think that's super critical. I mean, you talked about these gradients. It's interesting, Pete. I think about when I joined the software selling world, the model then was you had outside sales and inside sales.
Yeah.
And then you had partners outside your organization.
Yeah, VARs or whatever. Yeah.
That was this model. Yeah. And then I think like around 2000, Salesforce and a few other, the SaaS companies really started reconstituting that model to be like this. It was by segment. It was like small business, and those tended to be more inside sales reps, to mid-market were maybe a little hybridy, and then enterprise were more your classic enterprise reps. Today, where I think it's going is I can see the model of the future be very much that, look, we have a PLG motion. It's completely self-service, friction-free. But then we have a sales assisted model, which is you do a lot of the lifting yourself as a buyer, but maybe the price point's high enough that I do need a sales rep involved in the cycle at some stage. And then there's the pure sales led. And I sit here and think about that a lot of times of, is that the model for how orgs are going to structure their sales go-to-market business out the windshield from now?
Yeah, 100%. And I think actually that's something that a lot of organizations are seeing right now is like they're having to modify their sales motions is that um, like adding a very like a very quick tops down motion on top of like a PLG entry, because what previously might have been the ability to transact, perhaps meaningfully at the PLG, at the like the group level, like the team level or the group level. Now you might not even be able to transact, or if you do transact, congratulations, they're just going to churn in 9 months anyway. So like, what was the point?
Well,
Right.
going back to, I remember specifically at Marketo. Marketo totally started off as a pure SMB play with designs to move up, and we did that over a course of several years. And I remember our first really big deal. We totally punched above our weight class. We went out. I think we outmaneuvered some bigger competitors, more well-funded competitors, ones with better customer base, more employee. They had more of everything, more product. They had more of everything. And we won the deal. And I remember the CEO calling an all company meeting, which wasn't that tough because we were probably 25 people. And, and he was like, hey team, when a support ticket by this company gets logged, it is a P000. He's like, call comes in, we jump on this, right? Like we get a ping from them on our site, we pounce all over it. And it was really interesting because it helped us really get this mindset that, look, this is a different level of customer. We're going to have to deliver a different level of experience and service level to them. And it got that mindset rolling. And I remember after we got that deal, him coming to me saying, I think we should hire our first enterprise rep. And we hired this great woman. And I remember saying to her when she signed on, it took a little bit to convince her, but we finally persuaded her to join. I told her, you're going to lose more than you win this year. And she was like, wait, what do you mean? Like, I'm a really skilled sales rep. I'm really good. I go, it's not you. It's not you. I totally trust that you're great. That's why we wanted you to be here and hired you.
But you'll win them on the second pass through the funnel next year.
Yeah. And I remember we were working on a huge bank over in Europe, and it came down, we got selected and we were negotiating the deal, and we couldn't transact the deal because of security requirements. And I remember like just licking our wounds on that one because we tried everything. Like, can we commit? We'll do this in the next 6 months. And they're like, no, we need this software right now. We're like, we'll commit to do it in 3 months. And they're like, no, like we were trying just to land them. And and we ended up losing that deal and just couldn't get it right then, because nothing to do with the salesmanship that was displayed. It was all about the challenge of was our company ready to sell to that big of an organization?
Yeah. And I think that's really important. Right? Like that just goes to show you why like you want to bring like 1 or 2 of those on at a time versus like, hey, look, I just closed like 10 enterprise logos. So that way the rest of your organization can react appropriately and you can find these bugs. Like I remember when we started going up market a couple of years ago, and this was like down market, up market, like we started encountering these organizations that had like actual security teams, right? And so like I was having to fill out these security questionnaires, like, oh my God, what a disaster, right? And so we were able to, like, so a good example of this would like be like even just like finding vendors that like help you. Like at the time we found this company called Security Pal that that like automatically does your security questionnaires for you and turns it around in like less than 24 hours. And like, but if I had like a bunch of pipe gen that was showing up, that, and like in our case, because like Atrium takes like 5 minutes to turn on an account, we actually turn on data access. Like people turn on an Atrium account before they transact. And so like you could essentially just like waterboard your organization with like this thing. Right. And so what we started to do is like, oh man, this is a pain in the ass. And then we found Security Pal, and it's like, okay, cool, problem solved. And then we started running into like SOC 2 requirements. So then we like executed our SOC 2, like, and now there's like vendors like Drata, who can like make it such that you can get your SOC 2 within like, a few months or what have you. And so I think it's just like making sure that like, as these like curveballs show up, like you have enough time to like really nail them versus just being completely inundated by them. And the same is true with respect to like your delivery motion, right? Like, so, as we around like, I want to say like last year, maybe 18 months ago, we started bringing on some like larger customers. Like, usually 3 years ago, 4 years ago, the prototypical Atrium customer was like a VP of sales with an AE manager, like maybe 2 AE managers, an SDR manager, and like a sales ops person. And so now like the profile of our, like, we still service those customers, but now the profile of the organization that we work with is like 10 managers, 20 managers, 40 managers, 60 managers, et cetera, where organizations really want to systematize the way that their managers manage by metric. And of course, it's like a 10-person net sales ops team and so on and so forth. And so like the CS motion associated with that is very, very different. It's not like, all right, great, let's get everybody on an onboarding call. It's like, no way, right? Like the CSM is more of like, quarterback, like, okay, cool, I'm going to take the champion. We're going to we're going to redo discovery and align on like the staging of this. And then we're going to like, start rolling this out, and we're going to be reporting back to people. And if you don't do that stuff and you apply even just like an SMB success motion, like even after you've taken down the customer, it's going to be like a total, it's going to be a total disaster. So I think that those are all like really important things to kind of consider. Anything to add before we move on from this topic, Bill?
No, I think we covered that one well.
Nice. Yeah. So I think that one thing that I would love to touch on here is, we were talking about one of the reasons why organizations are going up market right now and like targeting orgs that really have like going concern businesses, that even though like maybe they're doing fewer technology initiatives, at least like they're still like they still have the opportunity to apply new technology in a way that like makes their business more effective. It's essentially like you're seeing lots of churn right now, like prior organizations that maybe didn't have didn't have product market fit, or maybe like shedding parts of their organization, whether it's their sales organization or they're really kind of going into cockroach mode. Or like there's the other version too, which is like there's layoffs that are happening, right? And so like if you are a seat-based model, or even like a consumption model, when there's less business being done within an organization, you're probably going to see less demand for your software. And so I think that like one topic that one of the kind of phrases that we have on our CS team here is like save the logo, save the world, right? Where you really want to just continue to keep a foothold in the account, even if you have a situation where, say like in Atrium's case, like some of our customers have just like completely gotten rid of their sales organizations, which, eventually they'll come back around again, but it's pretty tough. It's pretty tough in a situation like that. But even if you like have your sales organization, they still really need to measure those reps effectively. And that's, what they look for, is something like Atrium to help them with. What are your thoughts on like downsell as like the new upsell?
What I'm seeing is every company in their weekly e-staff and their board decks, they would always present new business. Most companies track expansion, and expansion can be broken into kind of two categories. There's upsell and then cross-sell. So if you're that far along in your business that you have maybe a second or a third product, then you track cross-sell, typically separate from just upsell. And then everybody always had this churn line. Now what's happened is that churn's become a lot more in focus. And churn, there's two types that people are paying attention to. We always pay attention to it, but one obviously has increased because, Pete, you and I have talked about this, in the last 3 months. You look at Meta, you look at Microsoft doing layoffs. If those companies are doing layoffs, you sure better bet that your Series A, Series B has already trimmed down the organization, which means you've lost people. So certainly on a seat base, but certainly also on a consumption basis, it means there's less to go around. So from that perspective, one of the things that I've just observed is the nuanced messaging of companies around what's churn and what's downsell. And I think they're really important to call out inside of organizations, because churn is someone turning you off, right? I didn't see value in the in the product, or I couldn't afford the product, or whatever the reason for the churn is. That's turning off, and that's obviously the worst case. And if you're seeing a tremendous amount of that right now, that's a different playbook that I think you have to go put into motion, versus if you're like a lot of companies out there that are just reacting to what the economy is doing. They're seeing downsell, which means, hey, I had 50 users last year, now I have 25, or I had 10,000 consumption units and now I have 3,000 consumption units. And that's a different playbook over here that you're looking at, because there it's about, like you said, putting your arm around the customer, making sure that the usage that they are getting is valuable to them, so that when the economy stabilizes and when the economy goes up, that you're in a position to continue growing them, as opposed to have to go and re-earn back that business.
Totally. And I think that this is something, if you do a good job, like, I don't know, this is a pretty like glass half full sentence on this, but like that, like, downsell churn, if managed appropriately, can be a blessing in disguise. And I'll unpack that. And we see this quite a bit with Atrium customers as well, where if you've got an organization that ends up compressing, yeah, it's a bummer that like you just downsold a bunch of ARR, but like if they retained you, and I was talking with a buddy of mine who's a VP of RevOps the other day. We were having drinks, and we were talking about some of the products that they had churned recently, and it was amazing. It was like their LMS, like their learning management system, and it was like, oh my gosh, like because like there's just like a ton of content in there that has like been bespoke created, and it's just like, oh, like they had churned like 5 different things. So if you're being retained, that obviously indicates that there's utility there. So first and foremost, the second thing too is that when the people who are being let go, they don't just like stay on the sidelines, they go other places. And so I think it's a really key thing from a pipeline generation standpoint to make sure that you're tracking those folks. We actually have like specific software that we use to do that. We use a product called User Gems, for following,
Where people
prior.
go.
Yeah, exactly. Essentially, what we do is, I don't know, it's just be a little geeky about it because I'm pretty proud of how I have it set up. We use software called Census in order to send data about customer usage into Salesforce. So essentially, like every one of our users is modeled as a contact object in Salesforce, and then we have like their trailing 30 days page views or their all-time page views or what have you. And if somebody gives above like 500 all-time page views in Atrium, it's like they're pretty good, like they're pretty stoked. And so in that situation, it flips a bit on that contact object, which then UserGem monitors. So if that person ends up like landing at some other organization, like they leave, so and so, and they land so and so, we actually on a monthly basis get a notification of like these new job changes, and then our SDR team goes off and like honey badgers them. We have like a whole champagne play. We're like, oh, cool, like moved roles. That's really awesome. Like, congratulations. We'd love to send you a. Yeah, exactly. And so in this regard, what we've actually found is like when you have those downsells, and by the way, like even if you're not having those downsells, like it turns out that people move around. So like tracking your champions, even if they're not purchasing champions, but they're like user champions, can be a very powerful thing. That can be a very helpful version of pipe gen, right? It's like, hey, this person lands over there, and if you catch them, like you can't catch them within like the first 30 days because they're just like, hey man, I've like trying to get my like head on straight here. But what you want to do is you catch them between like 30 days and like 90 or like 120 days. Down here, they're already like off to the races with their priorities. But if you get them in that kind of like after 30 days before like 90 or 120, that's where they're trying to like line up the things that they might advocate for. It's a good spot to be.
Look, I think what you're talking about is a page from the playbook that pipeline is oxygen today. And
Sure.
and anything that you can do to be getting that unfair advantage, like you using those couple of tools, is a great play. I mean, I think Pete, where you and I think really aligned was we both like using data in the sales world. And to me, I think companies that haven't adjusted their SDR model by this stage, like if they still have the same model that they had 12 months ago, like we have this group of folks that do inbound, this group of folks doing outbound, and haven't made any adjustments to that, I think you're missing out. Like I said, pipeline's oxygen. You've got to be thinking about, right sizing those, not right sizing in the sense of layoffs, but it's like inbound is really, for most companies, fairly straightforward to track the efficacy of those people, right? You can look and see the very clear, we had this much inbound traffic, this many touches, converted that to this many meetings with sales reps, to this many deals added to the pipeline. Outbound is much more nebulous. And that's where I'm just surprised that in this economic change that we've gone through in the last 12 months, that more companies haven't shifted and gotten more granular on how they lead and drive the outbound SDR sales motion.
Yeah, and not just the outbound SDR, right? Like AEs as well. Like I think Yeah, like it's just resetting your mindset around pipe gen. And the way that I think about pipe gen is really like a portfolio approach. Like you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket. You want to have like, a number of channels that are running. Like the example I was using earlier about user gems, that's just like one channel, right? And like it
Right.
lights up once a month, and like it's a really phenomenal. Like it's a very high criticality and like high intensity, high intent channel, but it's just one channel,
One
right?
of the channels, one of the
Yeah,
pages. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I think that one of the things that we found across our customer base, and this is like a message that's really landing with a lot of folks, is that just making sure that their AEs have sufficient top of funnel, and then also like mid funnel, in
Yeah.
order to make sure that next quarter is okay. Because usually, like most organizations, like I'm gonna say they're okay on this quarter, but what I actually mean by that is like they like have their arms around it. Now it might not be okay. Like they
Right.
might know where they're gonna land and they might not be unhappy. They might be like unhappy about that. But like there's not really much that you can do about that. Whereas, making sure that you're good to go next quarter is really, constrained by where your mid funnel is at right now. And which of course comes from did we have sufficient top of funnel 30 days ago or 60 days ago, right? And it's like the idea of the best time in the world to plant a tree is 10 years ago. The second best time is right now. It's just like measuring those, like the top of funnel and the mid funnel is going to put you in a position where you're okay with down funnel in 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, depending on your sales cycle. And so what that means is measuring this and then driving programs to do it. And a lot of organizations historically have not bird dog that on their AE side all that terribly much, because it's just like deal centric,
Totally.
inbound.
Totally.
What are some of the things that you have seen being successful around just kind of like formalizing that culture of pipe gen, like a pipe gen mindset and a pipe gen culture in an organization?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with expectations, and you just talked about this, that there is probably less inbound right now, which means teams have downsized their number of SDRs, and then that also should
Totally.
increase the responsibility of what the sales team is doing from that perspective. So as far as creating that, to me, you've heard me talk about this in the past, Pete. I get inbounded like you do for a lot of great technologies, and I hear people talk about all the positive business outcomes, but they don't stop to take assessment of where I'm at today, what the status quo is. And I use this example of Coke versus Pepsi, right? They're both this carbonated, sugary cola drink. They're really refreshing, get really good on ice. You can mix them with bourbon and whiskey and stuff like that. So these are like the positive business outcomes to me of this. Like, hey, it gives you a little energy shot, a little caffeine jolt there. But when it comes down to how you differentiate that, if you apply that analogy to the software world, a lot of companies, I think, win on the fact that they've done a better job than the other vendor on assessing what are the negative consequences, what is the cost of doing nothing or staying with your status quo. And to me, that, like, when you ask what I'm seeing out there that's working, I'm seeing companies that are winning deals at a higher conversion rate, which means they might not be increasing their pipeline, but the pipeline that they do build, they're keeping a steady state on their conversion rates. What they're doing successfully and terrifically well out there is they're training their sales teams, their SE teams, all of their customer marketing teams to be able to go out there and, number one, assess what's the current state, and then being able to assess like what their positive business outcome is. Because when they go to close a deal, right, we were all taught that model of why buy now, and why buy me. The negative state and the positive business outcome, those are the why buy and the why buy now. Like those two work hand in hand together. So, so number one, I think expectations, AEs, if you're coming in, the last decade has been really great that this SDR model has absolutely become just a must-have mainstay inside of every SaaS software company. And now, with money being tougher to go and obtain, those have gotten cut back. So there's a higher dependency on you. And I think that expectation has to be set. And then secondly, instead of looking at our old school conversion rates, circa 2019, 2020, 2021, now maybe what we should be looking at saying, like, our pipeline growth rates, we should be looking at increasing our conversion rates, because it's just not as high.
Exactly. Like every op is precious sort of thing. And the way that like we've been it's so funny that you bring up the thing about like differentiation and kind of like what your current state is and what have you. And one of the things that how we've been talking about like how organizations work with us is that like look, when we're talking to a CRO or when we're talking to a VP of sales operations or what have you, ultimately what they care about is they want to make sure that they're like walking into next quarter that they're set up for success with like a good amount of best case pipeline. And so then it's like, okay, cool, well, like where does that come from? It's not magic, right? You don't just like go to Costco and get like, you know, best case pipeline. Really what it comes down to is making sure that you have sufficient quantity and quality of selling behavior that is driving that. And so what that means is it means activity, it means pipeline creation. So like tofu, it means pipeline velocity. So like getting to the mid funnel, getting to MOFU, and then also just making sure that you're working it well. So that means hygiene, right? And the conversion metrics around that. And so then just systematizing that across your organization so what that means is like, hey, look, like we have a Vista Equity backed enterprise software organization that has deployed across their entire, I think they have like 60 sellers and like they're pretty upmarket. They have like higher ASP. They've gotten down to the point where previously they had a goal on self-sourced ops and self-sourced pipe on a quarterly basis for AEs. What they've done, and that was like a year ago, what they've gone and done is they've gotten way more granular, and they've said, this is how many ops you're self-sourcing per month, and moreover, this is how many are getting to this mid-funnel state, like stage 3, right? Not self-source, but like all of your ops, and then they've gotten even more granular around, and then this is what you're like, these are the expected activity levels on a weekly basis. And it's not one of those things where it's like, hey man, if you don't touch like, you know, 10 net new accounts like any given week, we're gonna like fire you or whatever. But it's just like setting the expectation there. It's like, hey guys, like we all need to be trotting right now, and pipeline generation is everybody's responsibility. And so we're gonna throw this goal in line here to say, we have an expectation that like you're touching 10 net new accounts on a weekly basis, and you're touching, I think it was like 25 net new contacts, because it's kind of like, you know, if you do, it's like an apple a day keeps the doctor away. If you do that, even if you do like, you know, 3/4 of it, or maybe you miss a week and you over execute the next week or whatever, like the outputs are going to come. But if we don't measure that at all or set that expectation, like in 90 days, we're going to be super surprised that like we have no down funnel and we're sad.
It's, you know, I mean, to comment on that, Pete, this is a bit controversial, but I think head of marketing should be measured on all pipeline, and I think a head of sales should be measured on all conversion. The marketing pipeline is, you know, look, there's several sources, right? There's inbound, there's outbound created. If you have a partner channel, that's another source. If you have, if you have a PLG motion, that's another source. But the reality is, your marketing team is responsible for 100% of the branding of the company. It's most companies I've ever worked for, responsible for your market messaging, right? It's product marketing that comes and builds what your value props are, what your use cases are, like builds all that out. Now, granted, with interaction with sales, but normally it's marketing that owns that element. And so I like when I see in a board meeting, a marketer walk in and talk about, this is the pipeline we came in with, this is what we should have had to have made the quarter, or maybe they made the quarter and they come in and say like, look, we made the quarter because we over rotated into building pipeline, right? So I think you measure it both ways. And then the seller, the head of sales on the other side, comes in and talks about conversion rates, and conversion rates can be by segment. It could be by geographic area. It could be by the products that you sell there. It could be by your pipeline stages, right? That person should be an expert on talking about that. And those two things in my mind, Pete, are board level discussions. When, you know, I mean, you don't see a sales leader a lot of times get down and be like, well, we had a bunch of pipe in discovery, and then we didn't have enough in solution evaluate. Like, you don't see them get down into that deep level. And likewise, like a board meeting, when you're getting into like, we had this many visitors and this much traffic and this many MQLs, you're down in the engine room of marketing. And it's like, to me, that's just not a board level discussion. We might get there if things aren't going well, because we know when things aren't going well, we're going to double click, triple click down. But I think opening up with marketing, talking about pipeline, did we go into the quarter with enough, or did we go in with more than enough, and thus we had a good quarter? And then sales, do we go in, do we execute? Do we competitively win at the normal rate we did? And if we didn't, why didn't we? And what am I doing to fix that? I think that's a really mature conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I think the conversion rate thing, I think, like, it's really funny to see the entire industry kind of like rotate into being way more focused on measurement and management in a way that I think is extremely healthy. And I'll kind of give you a little bit of an anecdote that kind of like characterizes this. Like when Atrium was first coming to market around like 4 years ago or 4 or 5 years ago, we actually called like performance the P word, right? And specifically, like, we've tried to avoid talking about performance management or whatever, because like what would happen is a lot of organizations would be like, oh, I don't know if we want to do that, like we're very kumbaya, and so even the notion of measuring on a per rep basis, like win rate, like, oh, okay, like like that sounds very judgy. It's like, yeah. But now what's happening is, like, not only are those organizations saying, hey, in a scarce pipeline environment, why would I give the ball to the person with the 5% win rate when I've got this rep over here with a 20% win rate, and everybody's calendars are not as full as they could be? So of course I'm going to redirect these opportunities to this, like, to this rep over here, or these set of reps that are higher quality, like that have higher levels of execution. Moreover, it's not just a win rate thing. Folks are getting down to, again, it's that there's the top of funnel and then there's the mid funnel. And then what you have to do is you have to pay attention to how we're converting to each. So if it's one thing to get a bunch of stuff into stage 3, but if you have reps whose win rate from stage 3 is not great, right? It's like, okay, cool. Like, you're great at getting to the red zone, but for whatever reason, you can never punch it into the end zone. That's still really problematic. And so organizations, that one of the things that we're seeing is that organizations are not just setting goals on a per rep basis on like how much pipe and how many ops are getting, like, coming in the top of the funnel and then getting to mid funnel, but also, are you getting it across the end zone from that mid funnel, or is it just kind of like, it's a long way around to kind of get yourself nothing? And I think it's a very healthy thing that organizations are now starting to pay attention to. It's kind of like stretching people's brains in a lot of ways, like people who have never had to do this before. But I think it's ultimately a good thing for the industry.
I mean, just to add to that, I can see there's some questions on the chat about SDRs, about what are thoughts on the new model and stuff like that. I'll tell you what I go back to is when I came out of college, my first role was an SDR, and it was interesting. The expectation set with me from day one is not everybody makes it out of this group alive. It was this mindset that was like, you gotta run to win, and you got to eat what you kill. And if you do well at that, you'll get yourself promoted into sales. And I see a lot out there, Pete, where the model is, well, we hire you as an SDR and we have this career path into being a sales rep. And if you do it well, you get there in about 12 months. And if you're a little slower than the average bear, then maybe it's 18, 20 months or something like that. But the fact is, you make it. And I think sales, as we know, and we're seeing right now, there's a lot of SaaS software reps out there that are now thinking about, like, maybe I should go and sell biotech, or maybe I should go sell pharmaceutical or something like that, because it's hard. It's really hard. And part of it is the expectation they were brought in with. So I think at the very beginning of how SDR models are built, you can build a career path for somebody, but I think you have to set the expectation up front that purposely, that, like, look, we're looking for top talent. You don't just hang out here and have tenure and at some point get promoted up into the sales ranks. So that's number one. I think that is happening out there a lot. Number two is, you talked about open calendars. The fact that a lot of us have gone to some type of hybrid model now, there's a lot more open air. Like, like, I grew up in a place where, like, my boss was hovering around the bullpen, and it was great because that person gave me real-time coaching and made me better. That's the quality piece on top of the quantity. Well, you need data. You need data of what are the people doing. So going back to what you just talked about, we're going to define activities for you, whether you're inbound or an outbound SDR. And then we're going to set some criteria of what we want you to do as far as touches, as far as calls, as far as meetings set, for whatever the criteria is of what you're quoted on. Every company has a different one. And you know, of how far your SDRs go. Do they just set meetings? Do they qualify? Some SDRs do demos inside organizations. It just depends on that. But I think those expectations have to be clear. And the thing that's missing right now that's harder to do in this remote or work from, you know, anywhere environment is that that real-time coaching. And it's a lost art, man. Like, this is a terrible analogy, but I remember in my early days of inside sales, there was a senior VP and the guy smoked. And so, you know what? People that smoked would go out and have cigarettes with them. And in a 200 or 300 person organization, he knew their name. Now, I didn't smoke.
Yeah.
So like, I'm going to take up smoke and advance my career. But like he knew.
He'll go out there with gum. So
yeah,
hey, I brought the gum, guys.
But I mean, like, their careers, Pete, advanced because he knew who they were and he developed relationships with them. And there's something that's so important there that I think I've heard teams talk about, like they do Zoom rooms and stuff like that. And I think that's a really cool idea because I think there's learning to be had. So anyways, the net of that, was a kind of around the barnyard answer. I think there's expectations that have to be set, number one. Number two, I think there's quantity goals that have to be clear, whether you're inbound or outbound. You have to set what the volume of what you're going to do is. And then the quality piece is the hardest piece to execute on today, especially if you've hired in an all remote space where everybody's in different locations. But that to me is, you know, look, if you're in a software company right now, it means you've earned that job because that company's gone through 1, maybe 2 rounds of layoffs. And so if you're there and you're a sales leader, your number one job should just be coaching the heck out of those SDRs, those AEs, whatever the team is that you lead.
Yeah, and this is something, hey, Elliot, I think this is something when I talk with CROs and CEOs, this is a big topic that I keep hearing from folks, is this notion of like, I really want to make sure that my managers are managing, because it's not like they've got like 10 humans that are under them and are hiring more right now. It's like, this is the fire squad that you're going to have. Like, you only got these 6 and you got to make sure that these 6 are really productive, because like, we're not hiring 2 more and you're not spending your calories on that. So I want to make sure that my managers are actually, like, they're actually freaking managing, because like that's their name, versus just kind of like being their friend, versus just kind of like, you know, spending their time on deals versus running their own deals. Like, I want to make sure that these guys are actually managing, holding people accountable, coaching and improving them, but definitely like making sure the job gets done. Elliot, you here to kick us out, man?
I am.
Nice.
Yep, I'm gonna wrap things up now. Of course, want to thank everyone for attending. A big thank you for our sponsor today's event, Atrium. Make sure to check them out. Links are in the chat for some goodies.
Oh yeah, if you want to get your sales nerd hoodie, go ahead and hit that link and sign up for that. Make sure to drop your size.
Okay, get cozy, guys. Get cozy. Big thank you to Pete and Bill for providing the great content. Lots of great key takeaways there. Those key takeaways and the recording of this event are going to be available on our page shortly. Don't forget to check out our upcoming events, and we'll see you guys next time. Take care, everybody.
Okay, bye guys.